Welcome to Adulting on the Spectrum. In this podcast, we want to highlight the real voices of autistic adults, not just inspirational stories, but people like us talking about their day-to-day life. Basically, we want to give a voice to a variety of autistic people. I'm Eileen Lamb, an autistic author and photographer, and I co-host this podcast with Andrew Komarow. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Eileen. I'm Andrew Komarow. I'm the founder of the Neurodiversity Index. Today, our guest is Scott Steindorff. Scott Steindorff is an international television and film producer and writer who specializes in adapting literary bestsellers into premium movies and television. His most recent project that he executive produced is Station 11, a book-to-screen adaptation which was released on HBO Max on December 16th, with an outpouring of overwhelmingly positive reviews and accolades. Scott is also an ARC board member and neurodiversity advocate who regularly speaks with high schools and colleges across the country on the importance of emotions and feelings, as well as facing substance abuse. We like to start off every episode with asking about identity language, and we don't mean pronouns, although you feel free to share that too. We mean, do you have a preference, person with autism, autistic person on the spectrum, or no preference?
I'm autistic and proud of it.
Speaking of, when were you diagnosed with autism and what was the process like? And, what made you seek a diagnosis? You seem to be successful in life. Was there an event, something that made you seek a diagnosis? Can you tell us about that?
Well, I'm in my early 60s, and so I'm part of the lost generation where there wasn't a lot of autism diagnosis for children. And I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. And at the age of 10, the teacher took me out of class and said, "You can't make eye contact, you stare into space, you seem to have difficulty focusing, and we think you're taking drugs." So my first diagnosis was that I was probably sniffing glue, and then they took me to the principal, and my parents had to come in, and so that was my first unofficial diagnosis. In my early 20s, I was diagnosed with ADD, and I was in denial of it. I did not want to accept that I had ADD. And then in my, I knew I had something associated with spectrum, but again, I'm older, so there wasn't a lot of information everywhere about it. And so my youngest daughter, who was diagnosed with ADHD, had been reading about autism and said, "Dad, you're autistic and you need to look at it." And so I got diagnosed, many years ago, and got the official diagnosis and changed my life.
How do you think it changed your life? What did change getting a diagnosis so late in life? And Eileen and myself, we were both diagnosed late in life as well, although neither of us are in our 60s quite yet.
Well, I think in my early 20s, I had a substance abuse problem. And so I got involved in recovery, and I've been sober my whole adult life. And I think it was very much like that, in the sense that you get diagnosed and then you start looking at your symptoms and your behaviors. And for me to look at a whole life, raising 3 kids, having a business, all the difficulties I had. So it became for the first time, self-awareness, maybe, being aware of why I did certain things. There was a lot of, when I first got diagnosed, I was shocked. I was upset. But I knew I had it, and I knew it had been a difficulty in my life since early childhood.
That's exactly how I felt about my diagnosis. I struggled my entire childhood and adult
Yeah.
life, not fitting in. And I always felt something was wrong with me, like it was my fault. And then when I was diagnosed, it was like a relief in a way. I was like, oh, that's why I did that. That's why I can do these things that everybody is doing. And it seems so normal and easy for them. And so I totally relate to that relief, like the answer. Yeah.
Yes. And so for me, it was, I was socially awkward in a social business where I didn't want to socialize. I couldn't make eye contact. I couldn't, I have a lot of stemming. I have a lot of special interests, and I didn't understand why people didn't love my special interests. And I loved to read. Reading was my escape since I was a child, and it ended up becoming my career. And so I look at the positive aspects also.
So, knowing that you're in the business, like, what do you think of Hollywood's representation of autism? Because I feel like we're starting to see it more and more. Like, do you think it's accurate?
No, I don't. I don't like I think we're just at the beginning of understanding autism. And so I think there's so much misinformation. I don't like sensationalizing me and you and all of us on this call, is that, we have to understand it. We have to understand what it is and what it isn't. And I don't think Hollywood ever got it right.
Do you have a favorite, or maybe a not the worst representation of autism in the media, or a couple of them?
I mean, I don't watch, for somebody in the business, I don't watch a lot of it because it's uncomfortable for me. I think Rain Man was I loved Rain Man. I saw it when I was young, and I loved the movie. I don't know if it's an accurate portrayal of autism. I don't like those reality shows that portray dating, because I don't want to sensationalize, because I know how difficult it is. So, dating and relationships are difficult for us. So I don't think we should watch, that in a sensationalized way.
Part of when we started this podcast, and part of the announcement, was we said we didn't want to be inspiration porn. That wasn't the point. We wanted real people, real stories. So what about representations of autism where, I think the term would be, where somebody's canon, where they don't say it? I'm seeing that a bit more, and so, like, I think one of my favorite over the past couple of years was The Outsider. If you've seen, where I can't remember her name, but the character I'm talking about.
Yes.
They never say that she is.
Right.
But it's so clear that she is.
Yes.
And I really like when they do it that way, like the bridge, the FX version, they never say it, the overseas version.
Right.
What would be your least, and by the way, Eileen's never even seen Star Wars. I make fun of her, so she's never seen like anything, so she doesn't know what we're talking about. But what about your least favorite?
I don't know if I have a least favorite or a favorite. If you ask me what's my favorite movie or my least favorite, I just don't look at things that way because I'm autistic. So it's not something that
or some that you liked, or some that you didn't like. Oh, you said you didn't like the dating reality shows.
Well, what I really liked was the little boy. I can't remember the name of the show. If you tell me, with his sister and family.
Atypical.
Yes,
Parent, yeah.
I like that show, aspects of that show. I really do. And his relationship with his sister and parents, I thought they did a good job there. And I know the writer has an autistic child, so she understands, you know.
I love that show. And Parenthood, I think, is one you
Parenthood is great.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like it's like everything, right? If people involved are autistic or know about autism, they're going to have an honest portrayal. So it's like everybody talks about, race and religion and all these, but neurodiversity needs a seat at the table. And they haven't had one in Hollywood. And I really think it's important that we spread the word so people that are on the spectrum can be heard, seen, and felt.
So here is my my problem with Hollywood, I guess. I have autism. I'm on the spectrum. I'm autistic. However, I don't mind about terminology. My oldest son is 10 years old, and he's level 3, which, high support needs, nonverbal, self-harming behavior. It's like, it almost feels like a different diagnosis in a lot of ways. And I feel like most of the representation in Hollywood movies and is more like people like us. And, it's such a broad spectrum. It's hard for everyone to feel represented, right? So I wrote a book that was published called All Across the Spectrum. And I talk about my experience being diagnosed at 25 and, raising a child with nonverbal higher support needs. And I my dream is to get it on the screen so I can tell both perspective in one place. And I took some screenwriting classes and lessons, and it was like, it's so difficult. Do you have any tips for someone who has a dream like mine?
Yeah, keep going. Don't give up. Persist. I mean, the one that, as you guys are both autistic and you are involved in the autism world, is many of us have been bullied. Many of us I had a very difficult childhood. I stuttered. I couldn't make eye contact. I was bullied, called names, and it was so difficult for me. I've also raised, kids with autism that had difficulty. So I think you guys are aware, I just did a documentary called Understanding Autism, which I traveled all over the world, literally, for 5 months. I interviewed 140 doctors, psychiatrists, families, people that have a lot of needs and some that are higher functioning. So like your book, I tried to balance it, that there are, I have many non-speaking autistic people in the movie, and I'm very proud of the movie, and hopefully it'll come out in the fall. I'm still editing. But what I discovered in this process is we're just at the beginning, and we're just learning so much about it, and we need more funding, and we need more help and support for your child, and we need to have more empathy. We need to have more understanding of the parents. I always say the hardest part about autism is being a parent of autistic children.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the online world of autism, but outside of my work as an author and at Autism Speaks, my day job, I'm also, I blog, I guess is what you would call it. I have a large platform, and a big issue I'm facing is that there's a lot of bullying, especially with parents. And I get it hard, I think, because my platform is big. And I really wish, it's not incompatible to support the autistic person and the parents. And I think it comes with the diagnosis. It's hard to see the gray areas, and some people are really only for the autistic person. But like, as
Right.
someone who sees both sides of it, we need it all. It's the community as a whole, and it's
Right.
hard.
And the community needs to come together and understand we all have suffered and struggled, and we all want what's best for our children and families. And the family is really, really important. And so, my children are on the spectrum. My siblings were autistic. So obviously, in my research and my point of view is that obviously it's genetic, just like heart disease and many other things. And it doesn't really matter how we have it. So how can we create better support, better understanding of each other and what we're going through, whether they're non-speaking or high functioning? As my daughter was just visiting from Austin, and I was saying how lucky I am that I'm higher functioning and I found a place in my life. And she looked at me and she said, "Dad, you're not high functioning." And the truth is I do struggle with things. I struggle with motor skills. I couldn't change a tire. I have difficulty putting things together. I have lots of things and challenges that got me to where I am to overcome those. And that's why I say to you, the gift that I got with my autism is I don't look at outcomes like other neurotypical people. I just do it. And it's allowed me to create a pathway of success for me to function.
Can you tell us a bit about your neurodiversity advocacy work? I saw that you do a lot of that too.
Well, when I'm not filming, I work with kids and one-on-one, because I look at it, like somebody that has a substance abuse problem, an alcoholic or a drug addict, is that they can help another drug addict or somebody overcome drinking, right? I have autism. So I've worked with teenagers and kids, and they'll listen to me because I'm not a parent of theirs or a teacher of theirs or a psychiatrist. I have it. So I feel them. I understand them. So I think that's important for all of us on the spectrum to help others on the spectrum, because we can relate to them. Little things that I've learned along the way to help them overcome. And I think the biggest lesson I can give is, if you find something, believe in it and keep going for it. Don't give up. I didn't give up. The odds were so against me to make it in this business.
And you
And
did.
Have you had others come to you and open up and maybe share their experience? I'm sure there's plenty that you can't share, but maybe I'm wrong, and any names that you can.
what do you mean?
Just like because of one thing that I've experienced, for example, opening up in the financial community, I had a lot of people approach me saying, they were autistic too, or family or friends. So I find, so I'm curious if you had that same experience when you opened up publicly.
Well, I would, several years ago, they wrote an article about me in the Hollywood Reporter, which is our trade publication. And I talked about being autistic and my struggles and, information about my own autism. And I've never, ever been written about where I had so many phone calls. And most of those phone calls were from people in the Hollywood community talking about their children, their brother. Can you help us? We don't know where to go. We're having difficulties with school and it really opened up a lot of doors for me and them to communicate about autism. There was also a lot of shame and stigma. There was people that called me and said, here you are, whoever I am as a producer and writer, and you're successful. Why would you do that? And the reason why I'm doing it is like very clear. I want to help other people. I want to help people not struggle and suffer with the same things, whether they're a child, a teenager, a young adult, or trying to create a career. And we need to guide, and there's not enough support groups. There's not enough financial support for your child that is non-speaking, devices, and so many kids that can't get out of a bed or go outside. You have to watch. I mean, it's the hardest thing ever. And that's what needs to be portrayed in Hollywood. Show the real struggle, because that's real. And that those stories need to be told.
Do you think with your documentary, you're going to be able to show that side too? I mean, just like you said, like, for instance, my son doesn't understand that putting things in his mouth, like he just puts everything in his mouth and, like litter, like rocks. If he sees a car, he's going to run in front of it. No sense of danger. It's really hard. And I feel like we don't see that at all in movies.
I promise you, I showed that.
Oh, that's great.
It's really important to me. I have several non-speaking people that need help that are in the documentary. And then I have the superstar Elizabeth Bonkers. I don't know if you're aware of her, that ended up going and being valedictorian at a university in Florida. And I mean, her story is remarkable.
Is she the one who did the speech with the AAC device?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the most, by the way, talk about that video is the most watched video of any video in the history of the world. 4.5 billion views.
Jeez, that's crazy.
And so we need to tell those stories. And she's in my movie. Or a young boy that is autistic that started playing golf. And I think he's 11 years old. He's Sports Illustrated junior champion and found his way. We can, and it takes parents, right? It takes parents to believe that this is possible. It takes community to believe this is possible. We need to inform schools. We need to inform therapists, psychiatrists, doctors. So we haven't scratched the surface with this.
Well, how about people for whom it's not possible? Because a lot of people on the spectrum who are higher needs are never gonna be able to be successful like that. They're gonna end up in like homes, and not everyone can be a successful and meaningful story like that. Some are gonna need help 24/7 for the rest of their life.
But you know what? The people, and I talk about it, is the people that do need help their whole life, that need the support their whole life. The parents need help. and support. The brothers, the siblings and sisters, they need help. And there's something very special in a lot of those cases that I filmed, and I call it autistic love. And there's something so beautiful. And I discovered that with so many families.
It's true, you know, like I see my two boys, you know, and one of them is, you know, more like us, and the way they interact with each other. I mean, it's different, obviously, because my oldest son, he doesn't really understand much, if I'm being honest, you know, and it's still beautiful to see them interact in their own ways, and you know, the way his little brother just loves him even though he can't play, and you know, it hurts him that he can't play with his brother, like, you know, his friends at school and all of that, but he still finds ways to, you know, be with Charlie, is his name. I wanted to ask you about something you said in an article. I think it was on health, I forget, but you said that about ABA, if you know you're a duck, you're not gonna turn me into a goose. And I think that's misconception about ABA, is that it's trying to make the autistic person into a non-autistic person. Because from my experience, I mean, Charlie, my son, has been in ABA therapy for 8 years now, and they've never tried to turn him into someone who is not, you know, like they taught him, you know, some self-care, like brushing his teeth. They taught him how to use an AAC device. They don't prevent him from steaming, or they don't force eye contact. You know, I think ABA has come a long way. And one thing I do, or I try to do with my platform, is to really show that compassionate ABA, play-based ABA is really out there. And they're just really trying to teach skills.
And I think it's a beautiful thing, a lot of ABA therapists, because they really care and they want to help. And if they're doing it with compassion, empathy, and love, all for it. All for it. But I also think that non-speaking autistic people should get devices and be allowed to communicate and be allowed to, you know, excel in their own way. So look, AA is 80 years old. It needs to be updated. ABA, I think, also needs to be updated. Teaching universities and doctors and psychiatrists and therapists needs to be updated. We're just at the ground floor. So if whatever works, great.
That's good. Yeah. I think
So
you're right.
what I have one last question before Eileen takes it to the end. So you said so you have mentioned your struggle with again substances, and you just mentioned how AA needs to be updated. In what way would you update AA, and what advice would you give to other autistics who also struggle with substances?
Well, I also deal with that in my documentary, is that a lot of people with substance abuse problems, including myself, did it because we had underlying causes and conditions that needed to be dealt with. And I think what's really been the most important thing in me trying to, you know, figure myself out is understanding emotions and feelings, how to identify my feelings, how to understand my feelings, how to process my feelings, and how to express them. Because emotional regulation is a problem for all of us with autism. And I think it needs to be taught. I think it needs to be involved with the parents, with the children, with the schools, with the therapies, and really stressing, why is somebody having a meltdown? What is going on inside that little boy to cause him to have a meltdown? Is it sensory overload? Is he feeling overwhelmed? Is he scared? So it's understanding the feelings. And for about 10 years, I've been studying this, and it's really, by the way, I still have meltdowns. You know, I still struggle, but I understand why I have a meltdown. And I try to express my feelings, you know, differently, or pause, you know, when I'm having anger and intensity, because I've had that since I was born. And nobody taught me anything. They taught me not to feel. Don't feel. Don't get mad. Don't get angry. Don't get sad. And they're still teaching it. You can't do that with autistic people. And we need to do it with empathy and love.
That's a beautiful answer. Thank you. I'm going to ask you some quick fire questions to end this. It's just some quick fire questions. You just tell me the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite quote? And if so, what is it?
Never give up.
Favorite movie, autism or not?
Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Favorite director?
Oh boy. Martin Scorsese.
What's your favorite food? Comfort food?
Sushi.
And is glow in the dark a color?
Green.
So it is a color, you think?
Yes.
All
For sure.
I think it's a property. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. We ask everyone. We're just trying to figure it
I
out.
think I'm winning the argument, Eileen.
Oh, well. Do you want to tell people where they can find you online and your work and all of that?
Well, you can add me on Instagram, Scott Steindorff, or Facebook, or LinkedIn, and I'm everywhere. And I'm pretty easy to find. And I love autistic people. And this has been a really wonderful interview. I feel very moved by both of you. So you've inspired me.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so glad you came.
Yeah, thank you. Glad you came.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.